The bright side of addiction is recovery. And as we know, recovery is an American way of life. We are publishing this, our 17th podcast of the year, on the exact date that Recovery Coast to Coast took to the airwaves 16 years ago in Seattle. We celebrate this occasion with two very special guests. And in this edition of Recovery Coast to Coast, we're going to flash back to an interview that I did with a legendary musician, a member of an iconic trio that won a number of Grammy Awards, Peter Yarrow, one-third of the legendary trio Peter, Paul, and Mary. Peter is in long-term recovery. And we'll meet Elizbeth Patterson, who I met on my recent trip to San Antonio, Texas. Elizabeth lived to use and used to live, starting before the age of 14. She was homeless and helpless and hopeless. She was destitute and desperate, plunging down to a life of degradation. And it was that gift of desperation that was her bottom. Today, she's now 11 years in the community of long-term recovery, grateful beyond measure for finding the path to the restoration of her body, mind, and soul. I'm Neil Scott, host of Recovery Coast to Coast, and following 15 years of nightly broadcasts on iHeart Radio in Seattle, we've now upgraded to a national podcast. And it's available to anyone at any time. It features interviews with clinicians, authors, recovering celebrities, and everyday people in everyday recovery. Plus, vetted resources for individuals, families, and friends. And we invite you to enjoy the podcast and to share it with your friends as well. Recovery is an American way of life. We'd love to hear from you, by the way. You can drop us a note at recoverycoasttocoast@comcast.net and let us know your thoughts about our podcast. And perhaps you have a subject or maybe a guest that you would like to suggest. Again, that's recoverycoasttocoast@comcast.net. Recovery Coast to Coast is supported by Sundown Am Ranch, one of the oldest and most successful treatment programs and affordable addiction treatment centers in America. Now, they've successfully treated well over 200,000 adolescents, adults, families, all for the past 50-plus years. It's where recovery becomes a reality. Sundown owns 30 acres at the mouth of the Yakima River Canyon. That's just outside of Seattle, Washington. They're a not-for-profit organization, so they can keep their costs low. In fact, Sundown's one of the most affordable treatment programs in the country. The facility, gorgeous. Each patient's room has an outside view, twin beds, a full bath and shower. In fact, you can take a look-see at sundown.org/gallery. But what makes this program stand out is the quality of care. The quality of care from their staff who've been together for years. They are filled with empathy and compassion and knowledge and wisdom. And a great number of the staff at Sundown Am Ranch actually went through the treatment program themselves at the ranch. And they can understand what each patient is going through. If you have questions, you can certainly contact them at info@sundown.org. or through their website, Instagram account, or Facebook page. And if you want to talk to one of their amazing staff, completely confidential, toll-free number is 800-326-4444. Before we hear from legendary recording artist Peter Yarrow, I want to introduce you to Elizbeth, an amazing woman who wears her recovery on her sleeve and in her heart. She is one of the ones who her friends said she's never going to make it. But you know what? She did make it. Made it big time. She has traversed the roads to recovery and is now 11 years grateful, living her recovery out loud. Welcome back to Recovery Coast to Coast. We are down here in beautiful San Antonio, Texas at the Hill Country Hyatt Resort, the 47th Annual Conference for TAP, the Texas Association of Addiction Treatment Professionals. It's a great organization and a spectacular conference. They've had more registrants this year than they have ever had before. It's great. And I like coming down here because I'm always running into old friends. I've been coming down here and emceeing the program for probably 8-9 years, but always meeting new friends as well, such as Elizbeth Patterson. and she is with a number of programs, contemporary teaching, and West Park Springs. We'll find out about that. We'll find out about her as well. Elizabeth, welcome to Recovery Coast to Coast.
Thank you so much. It's quite an honor to be here and asked to share a little bit about my story and some of the organizations that I work with.
How long have you been in recovery?
I have been in recovery for 11 years. I just celebrated 11 years on August 2nd.
Wow, that's a lot of one days at a time.
It absolutely is.
How difficult did it get for Elizabeth in the drinking and using years, and what led you to not just the bottom, but the beginning of the recovery miracle?
I started using at a very, very early age, before I was 15. By the time I was 15, I was into some really, really heavy drugs. I lived to use and used to live. Came from a family history of substance use and alcohol. Had many, many relapses, had been in quite a number of treatment facilities over the years. The bottom line to my story is that I always wanted to matter. I never felt like I mattered growing up because I was in such a dysfunctional family. So I was always seeking that, just finding that one person, place, or thing that would make me feel as if I mattered.
Where'd you grow up?
San Antonio, Texas.
Ah, okay.
San Antonio's been my hometown. I moved to Houston, Texas in '82. So.
You mentioned dysfunctional family. Tell me about your family.
My parents divorced when I was 2. My father was a major in the Air Force, had a perfect military record. My father actually died of alcoholism when I was 12 years old. He had a perfect military record, except for one comment that said, Mr. Patterson, Major Patterson, may have a drinking problem. Yeah. So basically lived with my mother most of those years and then left home at 15.
Did your dad ever find recovery?
He never, ever did.
Gosh.
No, it was very unfortunate. And then mother had a stroke actually sitting on a bar stool at a little place she frequented in San Antonio.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, so.
Okay, so Elizabeth is 15, and then you're continuing to use and get in trouble, I would assume.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's really funny that I never picked up any kind of drug charges. I did have other charges, theft and things like that, to subside, to make up for my addiction, to carry my addiction through. Very involved in some deep, dark places. My addiction kept me in places longer than I ever wanted to stay and made me do things I dreamed I'd never do.
Oh, my goodness. And when did it come to a crashing halt?
So I am a mother of 3 children. Was not able to be present in their lives due to my addiction. 1997, I found recovery through Alcoholics Anonymous and some treatment facilities in Houston. Stayed sober for 5.5 years. Still wandering around with that feeling of loss of self-worth and all of that.
The hole in the soul.
Yes, I was actually at a place and I had to do a speech for, similar to drug court. However, it was a program in state jail. And I wrote something and I said there was a hole in my soul so big you could hear the wind blowing through it.
Oh, my goodness. Wow. How did you wind up getting into treatment? What were the events that surrounded that? Did someone say you've got to go to treatment? Did the court say you have to go? What brought you to the steps?
Let me tell you, I received what I called, and we call in in the Narcotic Anonymous Fellowship, the Gift of Desperation. Desperation was a gift for me. I got so desperate and hopeless that I didn't see any way out, and because I'd had some previous recovery in '97, I knew that there was another way. And so finally again in 2010, I reached that point again. There were so many times that I swore I would never use again, and then I used again. And I just got to this place in 2010 that I was again homeless, hopeless, destitute, desperate, living a life of degradation. And I knew that there was some place that I could go. And I went back to Alcoholics Anonymous. And then from there, I went into Narcotics Anonymous, which is the fellowship that I live by today. and have been doing that since 2010.
What does recovery mean to you, Elizabeth?
Wow. Recovery means an absolute change in my ideas and attitudes. I had to have a spiritual change. I had to find a power greater than myself, which at that time, in the beginning, was my sponsor. It was the rooms of Narcotics Anonymous, the rooms of AA, people that had my predecessors. You know, they were a power greater than me. And since then, I've been able to build a relationship, a spiritual relationship with a power greater than me that I call God.
They were able to love you until you could love yourself.
Absolutely, and they did so. I went to, I'll mention this quickly, Mercy Street is a church in Houston, Texas. It's affiliate of Chapelwood United Methodist. Those people have known me since 1997, and they have loved me through every one of my relapses. They supported me. Not once did they ever, ask me any, like, why did you, have you had enough? Or they never asked me that. They just loved me. And so absolutely many people have loved me until I could love myself.
Wow. What happened with the relapses, and what is different now that you're on a different path to recovery?
The funny thing they talk about it is that in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous talks about we could not bring to mind with sufficient force the remorse and hopelessness of the previous days, week, month ago. And I think that's what it was like for me. I forgot the horrors of my addiction. Drugs or alcohol would appear, and I'd be like, oh, okay. And I forgot the hopelessness that brought me to my knees. So, and that's what's different now. I got in the boat, in the middle of the boat. I wasn't leaning towards the edge of the boat. I got in the middle of the boat, and I did the things that were suggested. 90 meetings in 90 days. Call my sponsor when I didn't know, which was every day because I was very unsure of myself and the way to live life. I have been given a life worth living.
How did you find a sponsor?
So sponsorship, there's a pamphlet that talks about sponsorship in Narcotics Anonymous, and I read a little bit on that. I found a woman in recovery that I wanted what she had, right? She was sober clean for a long, long time. She actively was working a program. She was always in meetings. She has a sponsor that has a sponsor. And that is who I picked. And she was a little tough. And I needed somebody that was tough. Somebody to tell me, if you will, how the cow ate the cabbage. The truth. She told me the truth. Even when I didn't like it, I listened because I knew that she was living a life free from active addiction and that she had the answers,
The bright side of addiction is recovery.
It absolutely is. It's the golden gate, right? You cross through that gate, it's the golden gate, and it's got the golden keys.
And it is a gift, but it's a gift that you need to take care of.
Yes, and I do that on a daily basis. That's another reason I'm sitting here at this convention, networking with so many other professionals that are in the field of addiction that can teach me. As a matter of fact, I ran into a couple of clinicians here that helped me in the very beginning of my recovery.
Wow.
So it's really powerful.
Tell me a little bit about your professional life.
All right, I'll be happy to do that. In 2013, I decided to go back to school. I had not been to school in 35 years. The disease of addiction just stole everything away from me.
Sure it did.
And so I started to go back to school in 2013, I believe it was, at Houston Community College. I did my LCDC, and then I finished my associate degree there. And I continued on in 2018 to 2020, getting my bachelor's degree in social work.
Good for you.
And I'm currently doing my master's, third semester, at University of Texas, Arlington. And I'm about to start my field placement at my place of employment, West Park Springs Behavioral Health. And I'm starting my field next week, where I'm doing the hands-on training as a master social work student.
Wow. It's been a long journey.
It has been a long, beautiful journey. I wouldn't have given up. I don't think I'd be where I am today if I hadn't have gone through the things that I'd gone through. It took every relapse to get me where I am today.
Yeah.
You know.
They talk about programs of relapse prevention.
Yes.
I don't like to use that term. I like to use the term recovery enhancement.
Yes.
Tell me how your recovery is better today than it was yesterday, and how it'll be better tomorrow than it is today. Recovery enhancement. It just seems such a better way to put it, because a lot of people think about relapse, and yes, it's a relapsing disease. We know that. But a lot of folks feel like, well, I can go out and do a little more research. You know, you may have another drunk in you, but you may not have another recovery in you.
That is so true.
And so it's terribly important that we put the emphasis on recovery today, recovery moving forward, and making it better. Because as you've told me in this short interview, the progress that you have made since you have been in long-term recovery, that's a miracle.
It is a miracle. It is a miracle. And I am a miracle, from my history. So I think recovery enhancement is so important. It is about learning more about myself, digging deeper, getting to the core causes and conditions, looking deep inside myself, finding my character defects, and of course not creating more character defects by living in spiritual principles. Honesty, hope, faith, integrity, discipline, all of those things. And I try to enhance those on a daily basis. One of the ways that I do that is I do a regular 10th step, right? I've worked my steps with my sponsor a couple of times. I continually, 1, 2, 3, powerless, unmanageable, came to believe that something power greater than myself can restore me, and made that decision, to turn my will and my life over, my thoughts and my actions. And so steps 1 through 3 help me stay focused that I do have a disease and that I need help, and there's something out there that can help me.
When people get in recovery, it's not the greatest thing in the world, and it doesn't mean that things are not going to happen, because shit happens.
Yes, it does.
What happens to you? How do you deal with it when stuff happens?
So a very good example, I trust the process. But what I mean by that is I allow the people in my life that I have harmed to have their process, right? When stuff happens. An example of that is that I wasn't able to meet my grandchildren for the first 3 years of their life, because I had just abandoned everything I had ever loved. And my son didn't trust me. And what I know is that he was being a good father by not allowing me back in those girls' lives for me just to disappear like I did on him. And so, when the stuff hits the fan, I pray, I meditate, mindfulness based type of things really help me. Meditation, music, sitting still, being quiet with my thoughts. As I said, prayer is an absolute very important part of my life. I don't necessarily pray for things to come into my life. I pray for God's will in my life.
And gratitude for the things you have.
Absolutely. Lots of gratitude. I have gratitude every day. I'm so grateful when I get to climb in my bed at night, because for a long time I didn't have a bed, right?
Yeah.
And just the peace of mind and peace of my spirit, is healing. It's opening up.
How's your relationship now with your family?
It is beautiful. It is beautiful. My relationship now is beautiful with my family. I get to participate in my grandchildren's lives on a regular basis. I have a grandson. He's 4 months old.
Wow.
My little grandchildren, Nana, they call me Nana. They just love me. It's really, really good. And, through working the steps and, making a living amends, not participating in those behaviors anymore. Like I said, not living in character defects, but acting in spiritual principles.
What do you say to some woman who's listening to this broadcast who may be where you were 10, 15 years ago?
So I would love to say that there is hope, and I am actually living proof of that, and that you never have to use again, even if you want to. Our promise is freedom from active addiction, that any addict can stop using drugs, alcohol, can stop using, and find a new way to live.
Nana, Elizabeth, Thank you so much for sharing your story.
Thank you so much for
Yeah.
asking. It was an honor being able to share it, and it was very much of a pleasure meeting you.
Great. Nice meeting you as well. We will continue on Recovery Coast to Coast with an audio interview, first broadcast on our nightly radio show, which ran for 15 years on iHeart Radio in Seattle. We'll be back with my conversation with Peter Yarrow of Peter, Paul, and Mary in just 30 seconds.
She has always been your baby, but when your daughter got into drugs and alcohol, she turned into a stranger. What do you do? Where do you turn? Contact Sundown M Ranch. Sundown's nationally recognized youth treatment program guides young people back to a life free of drugs and alcohol. All treatment is gender-specific and directed by caring certified professionals in a safe environment. You can get your daughter back and get to know her again. Go to www.sundown.org to learn more.
You know, a number of years ago, I had the privilege of spending some time with legendary singer-songwriter Peter Yarrow, one-third of the iconic Peter, Paul, and Mary. It was kind of a God incident when I met him. I'd gone out to a bookstore, Third Place Books in Seattle, to meet Peter Yarrow. He was there doing a book signing for his children's books, Puff the Magic Dragon and Day is Done. As I was getting him to sign the books, we chatted a bit, and he found out that I hosted a nightly radio show about addiction and recovery. He seemed intrigued and asked to be a guest. Well, I followed up the following week, and again was graced with, unbelievable, tickets to attend what would be one of the final appearances of Peter, Paul, and Mary. And it was magical. The tickets were in a private box overlooking the stage at Carnegie Hall. It was very close to the end for Mary. She was very sick with lymphoma. She was wheeled out in a wheelchair by Noel Paul Stookey, and I still remember her singing that line from Leaving on a Jet Plane, when she sang, "All my bags are packed. I'm ready to go." Believe me, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. Now, 3 days later, Peter invited me to his home across from Central Park on New York's Upper West Side. When I arrived, Peter had just finished baking some pumpkin bread, which we shared over a cup of tea. Although he is not a recovering alcoholic, he is in long-term recovery in another 12-step program. Here is that audio archive with the amazing Peter Yarrow. Welcome back once again to Recovery Coast to Coast. I'm Neil Scott. We are here in New York City visiting with Peter Yarrow, one-third of Peter, Paul, and Mary. He's a singer, he's a songwriter, he is an activist. Peter, welcome to Recovery Coast to Coast.
My brother, a pleasure. Thank you for that wonderful introduction.
Peter, you are in long-term recovery. Talk, if you would, a little bit about addiction and the recovery process.
Some of us have become addicted to something in some way or another, and that involves a chemical process that is concomitant with this recapitulation of hole-in-the-soul self-injury. All people who have an addictive, ongoing cycle in their lives have this hole in the soul where they're trying to feed and at the same time starve that insistent demon that says you are not worthwhile, you are really somebody that should be punished, and then we punish ourselves by going back to the acting out or addictive behavior. We use various tools, we who want to recover.
We're visiting with Peter Yarrow on Recovery Coast to Coast. Great to have you with us tonight. Peter, I know that the Serenity Prayer has played a significant role in your recovery.
I have to say, the Serenity Prayer is very powerful. But there's another part of recovery that I think is very important, is the promises. We will know peace. Now, what does that mean? Forgetting about the fact, whether you're in recovery in terms of 12-step work or allied work or not, do you want to know peace in you? What does that mean? For me, having found a measure of peace that was never possible in my earlier years, it means several things. Number one, that I live my life through a lens of real gratitude. I really feel on an ongoing basis, I sit here with you, that for many, many reasons that have very little to do with the kind of list of things that have made me fortunate in my life, that I see the very act of living and being in this moment as something that is a great blessing. And I'm not a religious guy at all. I am Jewish, but I'm not, steeped in the practice of Judaism at all. I'm as comfortable in a Catholic Mass if it's loving and not, engendering animosity in some way, or preaching things that I think are hateful, and I've seen that happen too, or in a teepee. It's all good if it's good, and it's all the same. I'm saying that I have a sense of really knowing. The only wish that I have in terms of life is to have enough of this gratitude and perspective that makes me less isolated from other people and from history that went before and will come afterwards, so that whatever happens, I maintain my center core of caring and gratitude and love. That, if I have that, then I am a rich human being, and I know peace. I could not know peace if I was doing self-destructive things, because the self-destructive things that I was doing so destabilized my sense of being able to honestly feel the goodness that was within me, because the self-destructive things, as I understand it, had very little to do with what I was doing.
We're visiting with Peter Yarrow in Recovery Coast to Coast. Peter, there certainly are a lot of addictive behaviors that people do to try to fill themselves up.
Whatever you're doing, that whether it's your chocolate piece of business, or whether it's your smoking piece of business, or whether it's your debting, or whether it's your drinking, whatever, it's all the same thing. It's not about drinking or smoking or debting or whatever. It's about that hole in the soul that needs to be filled either with love or with self-destructive behavior. And how you do that is to come to terms with yourself and basically get naked, become vulnerable, and go through an exercise of realizing that you are one of many, and it is not, your value does not depend upon money, power, or fame at all.
Well, anonymity certainly plays a big role in all of this.
With the anonymity in the room, everybody is equal. Everybody is sacrosanct. Everybody is worthy of respect. So you automatically live the premise of the idea of what gratitude is. Gratitude means I am not alone. I am not isolated from other human beings. I am valuable in the most profound of ways, and so is everybody else. Once you have that perspective as the dynamic of your basic self going towards the world and the way you receive the world, you have the foundation for living a sense of peace. And I must say that the reason for me that I can see the 12 steps working is that it actually models that kind of goal. You actually get it. So the people go there and they feel better. Why do they feel there? Because they have touched and felt what peace is all about. Now, I have read literature, I've read the big book, but it has never been characterized in this way. And one of the things I think I shall do one day when I do, I don't want to write a book of my own life history, because I don't think that's really what I'm about. I want to write a book that's anecdotal, certainly in many ways, but that talks about this kind of perspective. I think that being able to, if you're writing songs, and you have to, there's no point in writing something dishonest. I mean, why would you do that unless you're doing something for the bucks? And frankly, that never was the reality of what I needed to do with Peter, Paul, and Mary. We were insulated from that. We had enormous amount of success right away. Fortunately, I am in the position where I can devote 90% of my time to doing the work that I believe in and love.
We are visiting with Peter Yarrow from Peter, Paul, and Mary. I'm Neil Scott. The program is Recovery Coast to Coast, talking with Peter about his recovery.
In terms of recovery, I think what I've just shared is a very interesting way to look at what it means. If somebody says, why should I go to meetings? And a lot of people will say, well, you should go to meetings because it'll keep you sober. But that's just a beginning. It'll go to meetings because it models the kind of perspective that you will want to ultimately adopt if you want to know peace, whereby you are not you, in the sense that people who don't want to take part in preserving the environment are all about me. They're not about me as a part of what has the legacy that has empowered me and given me my gifts and given me my heart and my thoughts and allowed me to become a creative part of what's going on and the next generation. If you want to have a perspective that transcends that selfishness, that aloneness, that fear, those walls of isolation, those meetings are an absolutely amazing way to actually experience the road to and the paradigm for living in peace.
Peter Yarrow joining us for a few moments on Recovery Coast to Coast, talking about addiction and recovery, talking about anonymity and safety.
Of course, you have to go to a meeting where you feel safe, where you feel your anonymity is being respected, particularly in my case. I mean, my God, if I didn't feel that sense. And as a matter of fact, there was one meeting where I was approached and recognized and, as a performer, and I felt unsafe going there because the tone with which my approach was, I felt I could get busted, in a way that wouldn't allow me to go through this growth in a certain way and could injure my professional life. Now I know that admitting to or acknowledging that I'm a person in recovery is a very respectable, wonderful thing. But the dynamics of it and the necessity for not repeating what has been said is crucial. And also respecting the idea that you do not take somebody's inventory. You're not there to be a therapist. You're there to learn, to live differently, to be in service to others and yourself. And in doing so, you become less frightened, less closed down. I attribute my ability to find this peacefulness, Now, fortunately, I was a very, very high bottom, an addict, because I functioned extremely well, but internally I paid a huge price. And now I don't. So here I am, happier than I was for decades. And I have been for a long time because I've been sober for a long time.
Legendary singer-songwriter Peter Yarrow on Recovery Coast to Coast. Well, that wraps up this edition of the national podcast, Recovery Coast to Coast. Now, if you've enjoyed the podcast, we would love to hear from you. And if you'd like to help us expand out our podcast to others, there are a few things that you can do to help us out. First of all, please hit the subscribe or follow button. It's free, and you'll be notified the next time we publish a podcast. Secondly, send me an email. I'd love to hear from you. recoverycoasttocoast@comcast.net. And perhaps you'd like to suggest a topic or a guest, maybe someone with a minimum of a year in continuous recovery, who would like to carry that message by sharing a story of experience, strength, and hope. Again, our email address is recoverycoasttocoast@comcast.net. And third, feel free to write a review of our ongoing podcast and let us know what you think and what you like and what you don't like, as we strive for progress, not perfection. And lastly, tell one or two of your friends about our podcast. That really helps us carry the message, especially on social media. And join us next time for America's Voice for Recovery, Recovery Coast to Coast, the national podcast. And remember, if you know someone who is experiencing problems with alcohol or any other drug, here's a 24-hour national helpline that offers free information and confidential treatment referrals. And they have Spanish-speaking individuals on that hotline as well. It's 1-800-622-HELP, or numerically, it's 1-800-622-4357. And another shout-out to our friends and our sponsoring organization, Sundown M Ranch, successfully treating individuals, including adolescents and their families, for well over 50 years. Sundown.org. I'm Neil Scott reminding you to stay healthy, live in gratitude, and be kind to others. Remember, the bright side of addiction is recovery. Pass it on.